Welcome back to the Learning Can't Wait podcast sponsored by Full Mind. I'm your host, Haley Spearbauer. Today, we are kicking off season 6 with a bang. I have the honor of introducing a key figure whose dedication to education has transformed the American education landscape, former Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. Arne Duncan served as the U.S. Education Secretary under President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2015. His tenure saw the implementation of ambitious programs such as Race to the Top, which incentivized states to undertake bold education reforms, and the Every Student Succeeds Act, which sought to provide more flexibility to states while maintaining a focus on equity and accountability. Before his federal post in D.C., Arne's career had deep roots in his birthplace, Chicago, where he led the nation's third largest school system, Chicago Public Schools, and served as the director of Aerial Education Initiative, advancing educational opportunities in traditionally underserved communities across the city. Today, Arne serves as the managing partner of Emerson Collective and is dedicated to reducing gun violence through his organization, ChicagoCred. In our conversation today, we'll delve into Secretary Duncan's insights on education in the 21st century, his work at ChicagoCred, and his vision for creating a more equitable and inclusive education system for all learners. Welcome to the podcast, Secretary Duncan.
Thrilled to be here, and please call me Arne.
Okay, Arne, I could do that. Arne, in preparing for this interview, I read your book. I listened to all sorts of interviews you've done in the past. I've read pieces you've written. I also asked my former Learning Can't Wait podcast guests if they wanted to ask you any questions. So there's going to be a segment called Ask Arne Anything interspersed throughout this interview. And I'm going to kick it off with my most delicious listener. He's my son. He's 8. He's in 2nd grade. And he has a very important question for you. He wanted me to ask you all about basketball. But
we can talk about that all day.
But instead, we're going to ask the question that was really burning for him. Mr. Duncan, do you know my teacher, Mrs. Guzzo?
I would love to say I do, but I can't lie to your son. So the odds are I probably don't.
You know, in a 2nd grader's mind, that feels so real and possible.
Yeah. I hope she's a great teacher.
She's an incredible teacher. She's done a lot for our kids this year, and I'm so proud he's in her class.
Son's real lucky. It's fantastic.
For sure. All right, Mr. Duncan, how does your work in education, Arne, how does your work in education really center the experiences of what you're working on today and all the passions that you have continued since you've been the U.S. Education Secretary?
Yeah, I guess my life or career took a little bit of a left turn after leaving the administration, coming back home here to Chicago, really focused on gun violence and trying to reduce gun violence. But unfortunately, it's been an issue that has sort of haunted me my whole life here, and lots I'm proud of during my time with the Chicago Public Schools. We can do that on another podcast if you want. But on my watch, in my 7.5 years, on average, we had a student killed every 2 weeks due to gun violence. It was just a devastating rate of loss. And going to those funerals, going to homes, going to a classroom where there was an empty chair and a class of traumatized kids, and trying to make sense of the census. That was by far the hardest thing I dealt with. It got increasingly more difficult, got harder over time, and everything else, academic achievement, labor management, operations, budget, transportation. I don't say that was easy, but it was all wildly easier than dealing with this. And I don't think I know that whatever we call ourselves, educators, parents, community leaders, here in Chicago, we fail to keep our kids safe on the South and West sides. And I say we're motivated by our successes, we're haunted by our failures. This felt like an area that was, obviously desperate importance that I had personally failed at. So coming home, this was I thought the crisis facing the city, and wanted to, dive in every way I can to try and make our cities safer for our kids. And I kept above my desk at CPS a drawing that a young man, a middle school student, probably 6th or 7th grade, had given me when I visited school. It's him climbing up a ladder outside a building, and his caption he wrote on it was, "If I grow up, I want to be a fireman." And for so many of our kids on the South and West sides, particularly our young Black boys, it is truly if I grow up. And for me, growing up was always when I grow up.
Sure.
And so to tie it to education, I preach deferred gratification, think long term, go to college. I still obviously believe that in the bottom of my heart. But if you're just literally trying to survive every day, it's almost like we're speaking a bit of a foreign language. We're speaking Greek. And so I would love to get back in education more at some point. But until we have more kids here in the city on the South and West side saying, when I grow up, I got to stay focused on what I'm currently doing.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't educate a child until you've taken care of the child's most basic needs. And so it makes a lot of sense to me how connected this work is to the work that you did both as the U.S. Education Secretary and at the helm of CPS. I know you've been very outspoken about the work of community schools and how the wraparound support that community schools provide. And this seems like an extension of that too. My first teaching job was in a community school in the South Bronx. And I had that opportunity to see firsthand just how impactful those wraparound supports can be, the mental health supports for students, for families, the education opportunities. What do you see as the biggest barriers to scaling up community schools as a model nationwide? And how can we overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, I think the knee-jerk reaction would be funding, but for me, that's not the biggest obstacle. The biggest obstacle for me is lack of vision. It's really sort of lack of understanding how important this is. And for so many of our kids, the school ends at 2:30, 3, whatever. The streets just aren't safe. And so I always say that in every neighborhood, rich, poor, black, white, Latino, doesn't matter, we have school buildings. And the school buildings are community assets. They're public assets. They don't belong to the principal, or to the teachers, or to the teachers union, or to the public school system. They belong to the community. And so the idea of closing all of these facilities at 2:30 or 3 that have classrooms, that have computer labs, that have libraries, that have gyms, some have swimming pools, to literally sweep kids out onto the street at that point, out of these beautiful facilities, makes no sense to me. I always want to be clear, the idea is not to have teachers work 14-hour days, but you have a second shift that come in, an after-school shift, the YMCAs, the boys clubs, nonprofits, churches, social service agencies, and let them do tutoring, let them do GED, let them do ESL, let them do family literacy nights, let them do all the academic tutoring. And it's just, so it's a vision that has not been embraced. It's thinking of the school building not as a school, but as a community asset, a community resource. And when schools are truly the hearts of community, where not just kids are learning, but their parents are coming in and older siblings are coming in, if a school becomes the heart of a community, I promise you those kids are going to do much, much better.
And you have visited many community schools, both in rural environments and urban settings. Can you speak about some community schools that you visited who really embraced that vision you name and what it looked like when you walked through the halls during the day, after the school day, on the weekends?
Yeah, I just think the intergenerational piece is so critically important. So when you have parents coming for their own education, here in Chicago, we had a number of schools that had healthcare clinics attached to them. So kids could, come for whatever they're dealing with. And it didn't just help to keep them in school and reduce absenteeism, but also honestly help to keep kids alive at some point. It's just, you see a richness, you see a joy, you see a sense of belonging. And with all that, you have an ownership of what's going on that doesn't traditionally exist. And when we did that with about 150 schools here in Chicago, I thought I knew all the benefits. But one of the biggest benefits with outside researchers studied, which I wasn't smart enough to anticipate, was in many big districts like Chicago, your turnover every year, your transitions from different schools is way too high, and families are staying one step ahead of the landlord, and every month bouncing, and so if you're at 3, 4, 5 schools every year, it doesn't matter how great the teachers are. That's a really hard thing to have happen. But in the neighborhood schools where we had these community schools, children stayed in those schools at much higher percent. So we did not eliminate poverty. We didn't eliminate all the challenges. But despite all those things that families were dealing with on an ongoing basis, they were more connected to that school and stayed. And having that continuity and that stability, better than anyone, is you can't put a price on that. It's invaluable.
No, it's absolutely one of the most central pieces to a student's long-term success, both while they're in school and once they graduate. And I want to stay with student absenteeism for a moment. It's a topic that is hugely important. 2/3 of schools in America, as you know, are at a crisis level with high absenteeism. I was recently with the superintendent of Montgomery County Education Service Center in Ohio. Her name is Shannon Cox, and she told me about this incredible partnership that her county has formed with the Graduation Alliance to reduce absenteeism. And so what they did was they conducted outreach. They visited, called, texted 98,000 missing families. After COVID, we saw a ton of increase in missing students, and they were able to get a 13.9% drop in chronic absenteeism. This is huge. When you have students that aren't attending school, they aren't getting the social and emotional support they need. They're not getting the academic support. At a community school, they're not getting the after-school tutoring. As the former Secretary of Education, What do you see as the federal government's role in supporting local efforts to reduce chronic absenteeism and improve student attendance nationwide?
Yeah, it's obviously just a threshold question that was a big challenge prior to COVID. And somehow coming out of COVID, going to school has become optional for students and honestly for too many teachers as well. And so addressing this front and center, I don't know if there's a bigger issue. I don't know how you get higher graduation rates if you have chronic absenteeism. I don't know how you have more students succeeding in college if you have this. So it's like foundational. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Being in school is way up there for academic success. And so the Grad Alliance, is that Bob Belfance who runs that?
It might be.
Yeah, maybe Bob. He does great work. And for me, what this is, it's not high tech. It is super high touch. It's disciplined. It's strategic. And what it takes is schools and school districts. I'm so encouraged to hear this because I've been actually desperately worried and still am worried that I know how hard it is to teach the kids that are showing up to school every day, but at least they're there. And if we're not doing everything we can to bring in those who aren't there, we're just leaving a generation on the sidelines. And the impact, obviously, for them educationally, the impact in terms of their, economic and social mobility is staggering. And honestly, I don't say this lightly, I think the impact on our democracy is huge. And so the stakes here are incredibly high. So whether it's knocking on doors, whether it's sitting on porches, sitting in living rooms, texting, calling, every child's story is different. Every family's story is different. But you have to be strategic. We call in our work relentless outreach. You have to, go back. And if it doesn't work, keep going back. If the door gets slammed, you go back.
Dozens of touches. That's what they said for each family.
Yeah.
Even if it was a non-return phone call, dozens and dozens and dozens.
And I hate to say, you wear people down, and they say, these people actually really do care about me in a way
that child in school.
There must be something here that I'm not quite aware of. And so that discipline and that commitment is critically important. And for children who are chronically absent, they basically have no chance of graduating from high school. Mm-hmm. The consequences for the next 60 years of their life are staggering. So this is not just about a little higher graduation rate or a little higher GPA or whatever. This is, you're trying to save kids' lives. And to do that, you have to go find them where they are. Final thing I'll say is that so many children who struggle in school with this, their parents struggle in school. So parents' sense of what school is like for them was a failure experience. And so if you're just sitting back at school waiting for parents to come to you, it's places for whatever reason, they didn't feel welcome, they didn't succeed, they struggled. And so the emotions are extraordinarily negative. So you got to meet them where they are, on the block, on the corner, in the house, at the job, at the local shelter, wherever it is, you have to go find them. And the power of doing that is extraordinary.
Incredible. I mean, these numbers that when I did I read the research report, I felt optimistic. I felt hopeful. You look at the work that's happening with Hetty Chang and Attendance Works out of DC, and you see such profound research that tells us how we can move past this crisis. And it is absolutely a crisis.
But we have to be honest about it. So we don't, this is not putting a man on Mars. This is not finding a cure for cancer. Doesn't take an intellectual breakthrough, although you always want to get smarter and innovate and be creative. It takes a discipline and a commitment that failure here is not an option.
You also just, in this conversation about absenteeism, touched on teachers and teacher attendance. One topic that has received a ton of media attention is whether or not there's a teacher shortage. And despite what felt like a never-ending headline battle, yay or nay, the results were pretty conclusive. If you look at district-by-district data, there is a teacher shortage. There is a surplus of teachers, but they're not evenly distributed across the United States. And you warned about this in 2010. You said if we didn't take significant action to repair the prestige of the profession, the salary of our teachers, that this crisis would continue, and it very much has. This question from Ask Arne Anything is from Ellen Sherratt, the board president of the Teacher Salary Project. She said, there are so many leaders in education and beyond who are championing higher teacher pay. I know that you've been a champion and spoke in the U.S. Capitol for the introduction of the American Teacher Act, and President Biden called last year for higher teacher pay in the State of the Union address. What do you think really needs to happen to meaningfully move the needle on teacher salaries in a way that will have an impact on teacher shortages we are seeing across the country?
Yeah, Ellen and her team do really, really important work. And I'll try not to give you too long an answer, but there's not a simple answer. As you know, the vast majority of funding for public education, usually about 90%, comes at the local level. It's usually 40 or 50% at the state, 40 or 50% at the community, and only about 10% at the federal level. So the feds are a minority investor. I guess for me, it's not too dissimilar to the discussion of community schools. It really takes understanding a vision. And if we understand that we do have a teacher shortage, we have an aging teacher population, so it's going to increase. Coming out of the pandemic, teaching has never been harder. I can't imagine teaching young kids via Zoom for 2 years. You have young kids. My kids are a little older, and they really struggle with it. And so the job that has always been hard has arguably never been harder than in the past X number of decades. And so it takes all of us saying, I always say that a great military is our best defense, but a great public education system is our best offense. And we know how critically important great teachers are for changing lives. And Raj Chetty's done work that one good middle school teacher in New York raises the lifetime earnings of their class by over $250,000. And you just sort of think, again, this is not about test scores or graduation rates. This is about having a chance to have upward economic mobility and enter the middle class. So it takes a national vision to help our country, to give our kids a fighting chance. We need to compensate teachers, principals in a very different way. Money is always one part of it. Money is not the easy answer. So we could spend all day on this, but how we prepare teachers, how we train them, how do we attract, how do we retain, how do we mentor them, how do we give them true career ladders? The system is I don't want to be too negative, it's pretty broken and doesn't serve young teachers well, it doesn't serve veteran teachers well, and very importantly, doesn't serve our children well. And so this takes a radical rethink, and the biggest thing lacking for me is the courage to do that. And everybody would have to give, everyone would have to compromise. But if we just try and keep tinkering with the existing model, I don't think that's the vision that needs to meet the moment for our kids and for our country.
One reason I was really excited to interview you is because you have that perspective. And that's something that I say very often, that this isn't a system that we can slowly work on and tweak. This has to be overhauled. We have to think of outside the box innovative solutions that currently aren't being implemented at scale but are working. You said it just now, and you've also said it before, that great teaching truly matters. What happens when schools have not just no great teachers, but no teachers at all? So how we know that these vacancies are real. We know that technology can be one effective way in solving them. How can schools leverage technology? Where have you seen it, schools leveraging technology to solve the teacher vacancy crisis?
Yeah, I think for me, technology is always a teaching tool. All the research I've seen, people worry about technology replacing teachers. For me, that's never the goal. It's great teachers plus great technology, and the technology being a strategy to get there that has the best learning outcomes. So for me, this is not something that teachers should be worried about. It's something to embrace. Having said that, if you literally don't have a biology class, and if you can take that class online or with another community, and I would see this in rural America where they literally didn't have a biology teacher. So this is pre-pandemic, everything, where they were figuring out how to do that. There's a group I work with, the National Equity Lab, that is having college classes taught via technology in classrooms. They do have a classroom teacher there, but those kids are getting exposure to college and getting a college credit. So I think technology can be a backstop if you literally don't have a teacher. For me, that is wildly suboptimal, and trying to find ways to bring in teachers. And again, this is where I'm, maybe a little radical or controversial. People can push back. It is harder to hire in the inner city. It is harder to hire in rural and remote communities. The hardest place I ever saw to hire, and I visited many of them, was on Native American reservations. And they were literally bringing in teachers from the Philippines because they couldn't find people who were born in this country to teach. And I'm so thankful people from the Philippines would come in, so they had a physical teacher in the classroom, but it broke my heart that that's what it took. And so thinking about, again, not everyone will love this, differentials in teacher pay, where it costs more, where the cost of living is higher, where the work is tougher, where it's hard to get someone, can you pay them a bonus, a premium to take on that work? We have shortages in certain areas, as you know, in the STEM fields, and that's where so many jobs are. So can you pay a math and science teacher, 10, 15, 20% more? Lots of folks will push back for lots of reasons, but I think there is a reality of, to your point, a mismatch of where teachers are and where they're needed. There's a mismatch in what they're being trained in and the actual jobs that are available. There's no marketplace there. There's not a rational marketplace. And again, I'll never say money is the answer. It is not. But having some financial incentives to take on areas of critical need, having some financial incentives to go live and work in communities where that is harder to do, I think that would be a really important breakthrough. Not the answer, but important breakthrough. And let's see what happens with that. Let's see if that changes the dynamics.
Every child deserves a great teacher, no matter where they live.
100%.
I could say so much more about this. This is like the heart of the work that I do today. It's the problem I see most challenge on a daily basis in school districts all over the U.S. And it's one thing that I'm really happy that I get to be a part of that solution. A question I have for you, you're talking a lot about, I have a radical opinion, but you've been known to bridge the divide. Your bipartisan efforts while you were the U.S. Education Secretary were pretty legendary in getting both sides of the aisle to agree on solutions that were best for kids. What lessons have you learned about effective leadership and bringing both sides of the aisle together that can be beneficial in driving meaningful change within education?
Well, I tried hard. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I failed, and sometimes I had both sides mad at me. So
That's life, though, right? Like
that's part of it.
Failure is learning.
Yeah. So, obviously I happen to be a Democrat, but I always say education should be the ultimate bipartisan issue. For me, there's nothing left or right or Republican or Democrat or liberal conservative about more kids having access to high-quality pre-K and more kids having access to high-quality teachers and more kids reading at grade level in third grade and high school graduation rates, getting as close to 100% as we can and making sure those high school graduates are truly college and career ready. And for me, those are nation-building goals. And what frustrates me so much in education is we have what I call very small ball battles. We fight over this versus that has very little impact on what's really helping students. And if we could agree on some nation-building goals, and I just mentioned a couple, I'd like to see universal access to pre-K. Yeah. I'd like to see third grade reading scores, have kids ready to be successful there. I'd like to see high school graduation rates go up significantly, and have every high school graduate be ready for college, have some college credit potentially, have an industry certification in their back pocket. So a high school diploma is a starting point, not an ending point. If we can agree on those goals, then we can have lots of good debate about the best strategies to achieve those goals. And what works best here in inner city Chicago might look very different in California or Wyoming or spent time in Dow County, West Virginia. And you need to have lots of flexibility to create and innovate. And then let's just be transparent around results and what works well. One place may not work well, or we do replicate it. What you saw in Montgomery County, that should be replicated. If you're getting results, we need to learn from that. So that's my dream. That's my hope. I don't think I named 4 goals. I don't know if there's anyone in America who's coalesced behind those goals. And that's what's missing for us is we don't have an educational vision for the country. And so it's too important. I'm never giving up. We convened a set of folks actually at the ASU GSV conference to really start to think about state and local leaders on both sides of the aisle. Can we come together to start to create an urgency and a vision and then see what works? And the final thing I'll say that, we had a vision for free community college. We thought that was hugely important. I think we got to move from a K-12 system to a pre-K to 14 system. We talked about it. We didn't get it done. Who got it done in Tennessee was Governor Haslam. He happened to be a Republican, but he took a quote-unquote Democratic idea, which really wasn't, implemented it in a Republican administration. Why? Because he thought the best investment he could make was in his human capital, his talent in his state. And so all the labels and names for me, that has nothing to do with helping kids be successful. And if we can't find common ground around this issue of education, I don't know where we can.
Arne, my final question for you is, what advice would you give a teacher starting their career today?
Wow. First, I would just say thank you. That it is, like we said earlier, it's an incredibly tough time. Actually talking to some teachers on Saturday, seeing their joy, seeing their commitment, seeing how serious they were working in a very tough community on the far south side of Chicago, it inspired me. And so I think teachers hopefully know that there's probably no better place, no vantage point to literally change lives. Maybe if you're a heart surgeon or an emergency room surgeon, you're saving lives. I think teachers also save lives, quite frankly. So there's nothing easy about it. We need to make it, better and easier and more support, and we all have to be in that together. But there's no higher calling, I think, than you can be a teacher. And the final thing I'll say is, so thank you. And just, it's hard to do this by yourself. Teaching can be a very lonely profession. So how do you build that network of supports? How do you build that network of mentors, whether they're educators or not, to help sustain you on your toughest days? And there are going to be days of tremendous joy, and there are going to be days, unfortunately, probably of tears. And trying to navigate all that by yourself, for me, feels a little bit overwhelming. If you have family, friends, colleagues, mentors, people who can be there for you, this is a collective effort. It's a team effort. It's not an individual endeavor. And just appreciate the extraordinary talent, coming into teaching. And like I said, had the joy of spending time with a few of those teachers on Saturday, and gives me hope for the future.
Arne, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I appreciate your dedication, your lifelong dedication to serving kids. At the end of the day, that's the most important work we can do, and we thank teachers for doing it. So thank you for coming on.
100%. Thanks for the opportunity.